Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Better Digital Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Briggs. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about impressions. Any time that you're buying advertising or marketing of pretty much any kind, you're going to have impressions. Impressions are a term that have been a part of advertising ever since there really was advertising. Maybe print, the early days of print, they probably didn't talk a lot about impressions as a term, but definitely once we got the TV and radio, outdoor billboards will often have, estimates of the number of people that are driving by. And if somebody at least could see the ad, if there's a reasonably high likelihood that a person would have seen the ad, then the publisher, the person selling the ad, would usually call that an impression. And it's really important to think about the different kinds of impressions, and especially if we're evaluating different kinds of advertising that we might buy. The different kinds of impressions, what context the impression is. Is the impression something that we know that the customer actually saw? Is it something that they just had the opportunity to see? And the way that we've tracked this stuff and the way that publishers are able to report on it has changed a lot over time. So when we're thinking about billboards or TV or radio, the best that we could possibly do are estimates, right? You could conceivably you could put a camera or maybe you go way back to the old days, a person with a little clicky counter, and count the number of cars that drive by a particular intersection, and then use that as a way to get an estimate of how many people would view a billboard if a billboard was there. With radio, they have these these little things that people walk around and carry, and supposedly that little recorder deal can figure out whether or not the person was listening to any particular radio station at any particular time, and then they would use that to estimate the number of people who are going to hear the ad. It's really hard to say how accurate that is. It's probably not very accurate, because the sample size is so small that one person with strange radio listening habits would throw off the whole bunch. With TV, we have the Nielsen system. There's also some other competing systems out there, but Nielsen is the major one, and it does have the boxes that monitor what people what people watch in certain markets. But then there are, even in 2020, we still have people just like writing down in a notebook what they watched in some of the smaller markets. And again, the sample size is so small that one person with weird watching habits is going to throw off the whole bunch. So all three of those, your billboard rep, your TV rep, your radio rep, they're all going to talk about your cost per impression, and that's going to give you some kind of an idea, generally about how many people are hearing it. It's pretty inaccurate, it's pretty all over the place. But when we move into the digital advertising space, so some people have kind of, I feel like, are under the impression that, oh, well, with this digital advertising, we've solved all those problems. We know exactly what's going on, and everybody's playing nice, everybody's being honest, and an impression is an impression, and you can feel pretty confident that if somebody tells you got an impression, then a customer saw your ad, and that's absolutely not true. So there are a lot of different channels where you might be able to get impressions, and all the impressions are different. So we're going to dive into some of the different channels, some of the different advertising opportunities that are available to small and medium-sized businesses, and how those impressions work, how they get reported. And so let's start with search. Search is pretty simple. You've really only got Google and Bing. The the Bing platform serves ads on, you know, your DuckDuckGos and your other minor search engines. Um, so those are really the only two places where you can buy impressions. Now there is a difference between a search partner impression and a search engine impression. Um, and there's a couple, you know, there's some different terms about this, but the way that we should think about it is if it's a search engine that you meant to show up on, right? You go to Google Ads, right? You're trying to serve ads on Google, right? Well, by default, they have the search partners clicked. So you're also going to buy ads on this entire network of search partners, and that can be all kinds of different stuff. Like you really, I mean, I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list because there are literally hundreds to thousands of search partners. You know, depending on how you identify a specific site, you know, is a subdomain a different site? I don't know. But in any case, the actual search engine would be Google. You know, it could be Bing. You know, if you're going to Bing because you want to buy DuckDuckGo ads, then, you know, DuckDuckGo you could look at as being a search engine that you're targeting. You know, you could look at it as that as the engine. But since you have to buy all these other search engines with Bing, you know, it's not really that feasible. With Bing, a larger percentage of the traffic is search partners than with Google. But the search engine impression on Google or on Bing, for the most part, Bing has some shenanigans, but those shenanigans are a little beyond the scope of this video. So, but definitely on Google, if you buy the Google ads and you unclick the search partners, you're only buying Google. Then what's going to happen is somebody's going to type in a keyword. It's going to be responsive to a keyword that you picked in your ad. If you need more information about how broad match, exact match, phrase match, and modified broad work, I've covered that in some other videos. I'll try to link to that one in the description of this video. But in any case, the person's typed in the keyword and then your ad showed up, and they probably saw it. The caveat here now, it used to be, you know, you go back 7 years ago, say, we had most of the impressions were still on desktop. The right-hand side showed up. It was, you know, you had the 3 ads in the top and then the right-hand side. So the customer pretty much saw all the ads, you know, I mean, at least it was a viewable impression. So, I mean, the difference between one way to think about, at least the difference between and the way that I think is helpful to think about the difference between a impression and a viewable impression is that the viewable impression happens when the ad is within the viewable portion of the screen. The Interactive Advertising Bureau defines it as, I think it's 0.1 second. I mean, it's not even a full second, but as long as it's on the screen, then it's a viewable impression. But so pretty much all of the impressions that you bought on a Google search back in the day would have been viewable. Most all of the impressions, I mean, you know, if you're in position 3, then it's possible then you weren't viewable. Because you'll get an impression, right? If you're targeting keyword X, customer searches keyword X on their mobile phone, let's say, and your ad fires, then you know, you get an impression in your Google Ads account. It's going to tell you that you got an impression. Now, if the person does the search, they click on the very first ad, and you were in position 3, it's possible they didn't even see your ad, right? But most of the time, customers aren't just gonna, you know, do the kind of I'm feeling lucky, you know. They're not just going to search and completely mindlessly click the first ad. They'll probably scroll around a little bit, look at a couple different things. So they probably saw your ad. The other thing to think about is that now we have ads all the way down at the bottom of the screen in Google Ads. And if you're in those positions at the bottom of the screen, then it becomes a lot more likely that your impression wasn't viewable. So those are viewable and non-viewable impressions in search. So we can also think about display. So display is where you're buying ads on the local TV station's website, or you know, you're any kind of different blog or alternative news site that's out there. You could be buying uh, weather.com. AccuWeather is a pretty big traffic partner for a lot of this kind of stuff. And you can also be buying display ads within apps, right? So if you've got maybe a free solitaire app on your phone that's serving you ads, or Candy Crush, a lot of these different uh, apps and games will have kind of free version. A lot of times they'll have a free version that'll be supported by ads. So you could see ads, in the between games, or in the middle of the game, at the bottom of the screen. These are all display opportunities. So you've got your websites and your apps broadly that will support the ability for an advertiser to buy an impression. Now, whether or not that impression is viewable is something that a lot of times we probably don't think about as much as we should, because especially if you're buying cost per impression. I mean, one of the common ways that display advertising, the digital display advertising is sold, is on a cost per thousand CPM basis. So if you're buying impressions and you're paying for impressions, but those impressions aren't viewable, then you should be thinking, or at least, some significant portion. Let's say that 15% of your impressions get viewed. Then you should definitely be valuing that traffic differently than if you had a 95% viewable rate. So whether or not an impression is viewable is basically whether or not it actually shows on the display, whether you're talking about a computer or a mobile device. The in-app ads will often have significantly higher viewability rates than on a website. And some websites, I mean, there's actually a lot of websites out there that play some really kind of shenanigan-y games with the way that they serve ads, right? Because the website is getting paid per impression. So the more ads that they can squash onto a page, and the more different pages they can get you to view, the more money they're going to make out of this cost per thousand that these advertisers are paying them, right? So that's where you get, and so one of the things that you want to think about if you're buying impressions on the Google Display Network, or maybe you're using DoubleClick, you could be buying from some third-party programmatic vendor. Any of that, what you want to think about is, are these impressions viewable? Especially if you're buying website impressions, are these impressions viewable? Am I ending up at the on the 74th column of ads down on Dipley's list of the 25 weird celebrity dogs, where they're just clicking through and seeing the picture of the dog, but it also gets tons and tons of ads, and my ads being completely ignored. So that's how a lot of people, if you just kind of just go on and set up your own Google ads and I'm buying display, great. You're going to end up buying a lot of that traffic, and that is one of the major drivers of why a lot of people go, buy some display ads. They don't get anything back out of it, and then they're like, "Oh my God, display ads suck." So, viewable impressions. Thinking about viewable impressions, buying viewable impressions are a lot more expensive than non-viewable impressions, or impressions that will have a low probability of being viewed. But that's for good reason. It's, in my experience, much better in terms of revenue performance, in terms of lead generation. It's much better to pay the extra to get the viewable impression, because the cost of the non-viewable, I mean, obviously anything that you pay for an impression that a customer didn't see, it was wasted, right? If they didn't even see it and you were paying for an impression, then you wasted that money. And so even if you've got, so just buying a higher, if you pay a higher price to get a higher probability that the user is going to view it, because of the current state of the market, and this is all auctions, right? Where all of this is like immediate auctions that are taking place in milliseconds, in the back end of all these different display ad servers. the current state of the market is that people aren't thinking enough about whether or not their impressions are viewable when they're going out there buying impressions. At least your average buyer, they're not thinking about this stuff. So the premium that you have to pay to buy the more highly viewable impression, it is outweighed by the benefit that you're going to get compared to if you hadn't done that, compared to if you just bought whatever impression, you weren't worrying about viewability. Then you will do a lot better by going ahead and paying the premium. Another impression that you could have could be on social media. The Facebook metrics are extremely murky. We really have no idea. Nobody can give you. Facebook has their company line that they put out in their help documents that'll tell you what Facebook considers to be an impression. Obviously there's so the difference between like buying ads in on a display network like a Google Ads or DoubleClick or wherever you're Trade Desk, you could be buying ads on the Trade Desk. The difference between that and Facebook is that there's a third party involved. At least it's definitely possible that the third parties and the first parties are colluding with each other, to do different kinds of shenanigans. But at least there's a third party there. Because you've got the publisher, the website that is connected up to the ad network to be able to sell the impression, and then the ad network and the ad networks are doing some monitoring, and this is getting better over time. There's not that there's less shenanigans, it's just that there are different shenanigans. As the people who like to do shenanigans get more sophisticated. But in any case, the ad network is doing some kind of monitoring to figure out, are these impressions viewable? Are they being, generated by robots? All this kind of stuff. With Facebook, there's no third party. It's just Facebook, right? You're buying the ads direct from Facebook. Facebook is serving the content 100%. There's no ad server, in there. So we don't really know a lot about viewable impressions on Facebook. Facebook gives you some impressions metrics, some viewability type metrics, so you can get some ideas about what's going on there. And then a similar thing is going to happen if you're going to the other social networks. If you're buying Twitter ads or Reddit ads or Pinterest ads or any of these different platforms that offer social media advertising. Those will be it's basically 100% in their control. So if they're giving, some of these newer platforms probably don't even have viewability built into the platform. It is like a column that you can see as a report that you can get. So in those cases, we don't really know that much about what an impression is. You could go and investigate these individually. If you're spending $10,000 a month on Pinterest ads, you probably have somebody you can send an email to find out about it. But in any case, an impression should generally be thought of when the ad shows up. So you're scrolling through your feed to see the ad on Facebook. That should be an impression. And then we've got like podcast ads, right? So we could think about one of the newer places that have been emerging where we can buy ads or podcasts. An impression would be, you hear the host do the live read, right? It's pretty tough to measure some of that because of the way that people download podcasts from different places. There are some people, some of the like mid-roll in particular is trying to do more with, including different kinds of pixels to try to track, impressions and if you're, how many downloads it is, and then turning that into an impression and trying to determine, if the ad read happened at 28 minutes in, how many people were still listening at that point. They're trying to figure some of that stuff out, but it's not great in terms of reporting right now, especially if you're not just a giant advertiser spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. If you're one of those guys, then you're getting some visibility into some of this stuff. But if you're just spending, if you're sponsoring a podcast, on a small basis, then you probably don't have much good information. We're kind of, it's funny because um, we went from the digital, or from the traditional, from the billboards, the TV and the radio, where it was really murky about how many impressions were we getting, how many people were seeing our ads. Then we moved to search, which was for a time really, really accurate, really transparent, and there was a time where a lot of us felt like the display and the social impressions were becoming really, really transparent. And they kind of are. There's we've talked about some of the difficulties with measuring impressions on some of these different platforms, and that there is probably better transparency into how many impressions that you're getting when you're buying ads on a website or within an app or on social media than there was with with a newspaper or billboard, what have you. And now we're moving back in now we're moving into podcasts where it's becoming more complicated to be able to try to understand it. There's how many, it's just because it got downloaded, did the person listen to it? All these different questions when you're thinking about sponsoring podcasts. But in any case, podcast impression should probably be the number of people that actually heard the ad. Now, like I said, there's some difficulties in being able to actually measure that. So another impression could be a video. YouTube is the major place where people are buying video ads, but there are also a number of different video networks that could put you on, Fox or CNN or your local news station, or any other place where people are viewing videos. I mean, there are different networks that are available, but definitely the largest majority of the views that are available are on YouTube. Now, YouTube also has display ads, so that's one thing to think about when you're thinking about YouTube ads. You've got the kind of suggested feed where you've got the opportunity to serve ads, especially on desktop. On desktop, you can also have overlays. You could have companion banners that show up over on the right-hand side, or across the bottom of the video, like a kind of a chyron type deal. And those are all display opportunities on YouTube. Now, some of them, if you're buying the in-stream ad, if you're buying the video ad that's showing up at the same time, then you automatically get some of these other ad placements, or at least you have access to them. So as long as you set everything up correctly, and if you haven't set everything up correctly, you should think about contacting Samurai Direct Response, still accepting new clients. Then you can, but some of it could just be bought separately. So, you could buy just display ads on YouTube, and then those would be, impressions if they're viewed, and not impressions if they're not viewed. And the YouTube in-stream ad impressions, they don't, I mean, they'll report to you on impressions, but impressions usually aren't the metric that you're caring about. And it's really more about views when you're buying the in-stream ad, because you want somebody to actually watch the video. Now, whether or not it gets skipped, right? A lot of times you'll be using skippable ads, skippable 15s or 30s. And even, obviously if they skip it, they still had a 5-second impression, right? So that would be one way to think about impressions when you're thinking about video. And then views and completions, you can get those numbers within the Google Ads platform and find out, a lot more information about, what's going on as far as how many people are viewing what portions of your ads. And then, so views are a lot more detailed than impressions, right? You still have impressions involved. It's a metric that you can think about when you're looking at YouTube. I mean, obviously you can also buy video inventory in Facebook and some of the other networks, but your ad impression on YouTube is, like I said, there's a lot of different opportunities to create impressions. And when you're buying video, a video impression could be one of the things that you can do to maximize the benefit that you're going to get from any kind of a video impression, especially if it's in a skippable environment. Could be just to, get your logo out there early. Maybe you have a distinctive brand sound, like NBC or whatever it is. You can get that out there and early in the video, and then that can be a way to create additional value from that impression, early on in the process. So that's impressions. I think we talked fairly well in detail about impressions. If you like the content of this video, please click like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and I hope this helps you do your digital marketing better.